The fluorescent lights of Riverside Medical Center hummed their usual monotonous tune as Margaret Chen pushed her cleaning cart down the fifth-floor corridor. At 62, her hands bore the evidence of 4 decades spent keeping hospitals spotless, calloused palms, permanently wrinkled fingertips, and a slight tremor that came from years of gripping mop handles. But her dark eyes still held a fierce intelligence that most people never bothered to notice. "You there?" The cleaning woman. Margaret didn't need to turn around to know who was shouting. Derek Holloway, the newly appointed director of facilities management, had made her life miserable for the past 6 months. His expensive Italian shoes clicked against the linoleum as he strutted toward her, his face already twisted into that familiar sneer. "Yes, Mr. Holloway?" Margaret kept her voice calm and respectful, though her grip tightened on the cart handle. "This floor is disgusting. There's a scuff mark by the nurse's station, and I found dust on a windowsill in room 512. He leaned in close enough that she could smell his overpowering cologne. "Maybe if you spent less time chatting with the nurses and more time actually working, we wouldn't have these problems." Margaret had cleaned that windowsill just that morning. She'd also buffed the floors until they gleamed. But she'd learned long ago that Derek wasn't interested in facts. "I'll take care of it right away, sir." "You better. And when you're done, I need you to stay late tonight. The boardroom needs a deep clean before tomorrow's investor meeting." He checked his gold watch with exaggerated importance. "Some of us actually have important work to do." As he walked away, Margaret heard him mutter something to his assistant about these people and affirmative action hires. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. She'd heard worse over the years, and she'd survived worse too. What Derek Holloway didn't know, what nobody at Riverside Medical Center knew, was that Margaret Chen wasn't just a janitor. She was a ghost, hiding in plain sight. 25 years earlier, Dr. Margaret Chen had been one of the most promising cardiac surgeons in San Francisco. She graduated top of her class from Stanford Medical School, completed her residency at Mass General, and returned to her hometown with dreams of saving lives and breaking barriers. For 7 beautiful years, she'd done exactly that. Then came the accident. A drunk driver. A rainy night. Her husband David killed instantly. Her daughter Lisa in a coma for 3 months. Medical bills that devoured their savings. And then, when Lisa finally woke up with severe brain damage requiring round-the-clock care, Margaret had faced an impossible choice. She could continue her demanding surgical career, working 80-hour weeks while strangers cared for her daughter. Or she could disappear. So Dr. Margaret Chen had vanished from the medical world. She'd moved across the state, changed her surname from Zhang back to her mother's maiden name of Chen, and taken a job that nobody would ever look twice at, a hospital janitor. The overnight shifts paid enough for Lisa's care facility. The work was invisible enough that no one asked questions. And it kept her close to medicine, even if she could no longer practice it. For 2 decades, she'd been invisible. Safe. Forgotten, until Derek Holloway had arrived and made being invisible feel like being erased. The night of the boardroom cleaning, Margaret arrived at 10 p.m. to find Derek still in his office, talking loudly on his phone. She tried to work quietly, but every few minutes, he'd emerge to criticize something. The way she arranged the chairs, the streak-free shine she'd put on the windows, not shiny enough, the temperature of the room. "You know what your problem is," he said, blocking her path to the supply closet. "Your generation just doesn't understand work ethic. You people expect handouts for doing the bare minimum." Margaret's hands trembled, but not from age this time. "Mr. Holloway, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I take pride in my work." "Pride?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're a janitor. It's not exactly brain surgery." The irony nearly broke her composure, but she simply nodded and continued working. As Derek finally left for the night, he called back over his shoulder, "And make sure you clean the CEO's private bathroom too. It's attached to the boardroom. God knows it probably hasn't been touched in weeks." Margaret had never been asked to clean the CEO's office before. That was usually reserved for the day shift supervisor. But she gathered her supplies and entered the executive suite, a space so luxurious it seemed to belong to a different building entirely. As she cleaned, she couldn't help but notice the papers scattered across the massive mahogany desk. Financial reports. Strategic plans. And then, one document that made her blood run cold: proposed cost-cutting measures, facilities department. She shouldn't read it. It was none of her business. But her eyes caught her own name in a list, along with 15 other longtime janitors and maintenance workers. The proposal, authored by Derek Holloway, recommended eliminating redundant senior staff and replacing with younger, more cost-effective contractors. The projected savings were substantial. The human cost was invisible to whoever had drafted this, but what caught Margaret's attention next made her sink into the CEO's leather chair. Stapled to the proposal was an incident report dated 3 weeks earlier. A complaint from the pediatric ward about inadequate sanitation protocols that had supposedly led to a minor infection outbreak. The report blamed negligence by senior cleaning staff and was signed by Derek Holloway. Margaret's mind raced. She worked that ward. She knew for a fact that there had been no outbreak. She would have heard about it from the nurses she'd befriended over the years. This report was fabricated. Derek was building a case to justify his mass firing, and he was willing to lie to do it. She should leave. Forget what she'd seen. Keep her head down. Instead, Margaret Chen picked up the phone on the CEO's desk and made a call she hadn't made in 25 years. Dr. Patricia Morrison had been Margaret's closest friend in medical school. While Margaret had become a surgeon, Patricia had gone into hospital administration, and over the decades, she'd risen to become one of the most respected healthcare executives in California. Margaret had lost touch with everyone from her old life, but she still knew how to find Patricia. The phone rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. "This is Patricia Morrison." "Patricia, it's Margaret." "Margaret Zong." There was a long silence. Then, "Maggie? My God, Maggie, where have you been? We thought you were dead." Over the next hour, sitting in that CEO's office, Margaret told her old friend everything. About David's death. About Lisa. About the 20 years of invisibility. And finally, about Derek Holloway and his fraudulent report. "Give me 2 days," Patricia said, her voice now fully awake and all business. "Don't do anything. Don't confront him. Just keep your head down for 48 more hours." 2 days later, Margaret was cleaning the 3rd-floor hallway when the announcement came over the hospital intercom: "All facilities staff, please report to the main conference room immediately." Margaret's heart hammered as she made her way downstairs. The conference room was packed with janitors, maintenance workers, and grounds crew, all looking nervous and confused. Derek Holloway stood at the front of the room, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. "Thank you all for coming," he began, not sounding thankful at all. "As part of our ongoing commitment to operational excellence, we're implementing some organizational changes to the facilities department." The door at the back of the room opened. 3 people walked in: the hospital CEO, Dr. Richard Okonkwo, the chief operating officer, and an elegant woman in her 60s wearing a navy power suit whom Margaret recognized immediately. Derek's speech faltered. "Dr. Okonkwo, I wasn't expecting you at this meeting, clearly." Dr. Okonkwo's voice was cold. "Mr. Holloway, I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Morrison. She's a consultant I've hired to conduct an independent review of our facilities management practices." Patricia's eyes swept the room and landed on Margaret for just a moment before moving on. "Thank you, Dr. Okonkwo. Mr. Holloway, I've spent the past 48 hours reviewing your department's records, and I have some questions about several reports you filed." What followed was the most professional dismantling Margaret had ever witnessed. Patricia, with the precision of a surgeon, presented evidence that Derek had fabricated multiple incident reports, inflated supply costs to hide budget mismanagement, and created a hostile work environment that had led to a 40% increase in staff turnover. Furthermore, Patricia continued, pulling out another document, "This morning I personally inspected every floor of this hospital with members of the infection control team. What we found was not negligence, but rather exemplary sanitation practices, particularly in the areas maintained by your senior staff members." Derek's face had gone from red to purple. "This is ridiculous. I demand to know who fed you these lies." "I don't deal in lies, Mr. Holloway. I deal in evidence." Patricia's voice could have cut glass. "Your employment at Riverside Medical Center is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." As Derek Holloway was led away, still sputtering protests, Dr. Okonkwo addressed the room. "I want to apologize to all of you for the hostile environment Mr. Holloway created. This hospital was built on the dedication of people like you, and that will never be forgotten." Then he did something unexpected. He walked directly to Margaret. "Mrs. Chen, Dr. Morrison has told me a remarkable story. Is it true that you're Dr. Margaret Zhang?" Every eye in the room turned to Margaret. She wanted to disappear again, to fade back into invisibility. But Patricia was looking at her with such fierce pride, and the faces around her, her colleagues, her friends for 20 years, were filled with confusion and curiosity, not judgment. "Yes," Margaret said quietly. "I was. I understand you've had personal reasons for stepping away from medicine," Dr. Okonkwo continued. "And I respect that. But I wonder if you might consider a different role here at Riverside. We've been struggling to find a director of quality assurance, someone who understands every aspect of how a hospital functions, from the operating room to the supply closet. The position would offer flexible hours and could potentially allow you to maintain the work-life balance you need." Margaret's breath caught. "Dr. Okonkwo, I haven't practiced medicine in over 20 years. This isn't about practicing medicine. It's about understanding it. About seeing what others don't see." He smiled. "I suspect you've learned more about how this hospital really works in 20 years as a janitor than most administrators learn in their entire careers." 3 months later, Margaret stood in the pediatric ward, reviewing sanitation protocols with the new facilities manager, a promotion given to Samuel, one of her former colleagues who'd worked alongside her for 15 years. She'd accepted Dr. Okonkwo's offer, though she'd insisted on working part-time hours that allowed her to still visit Lisa every evening. "Dr. Chen?" One of the nurses waved her over. "We need your input on something." "Dr. Chen." She was still getting used to that again. As she walked toward the nurses' station, she passed a janitor, a young woman named Rosa who reminded Margaret of herself 3 decades ago, working hard and being overlooked. Margaret stopped. "Rosa, how's your daughter doing?" The one who's been sick? Rosa's eyes widened in surprise. She's better, Dr. Chen. Thank you for asking. I didn't think anyone noticed I was worried. I notice, Margaret said simply. I always notice. After work, Margaret drove to the care facility where Lisa lived. Her daughter was now 47 years old, trapped in a body that would never fully recover, but her eyes still lit up when Margaret walked in. Hi, sweetheart, Margaret said, taking her daughter's hand. I have to tell you about my day. As she talked, Margaret thought about Derek Holloway, who'd treated her as invisible for months. She thought about all the people over the years who'd looked past her, never wondering if the janitor pushing a mop cart might have stories or dreams or a past worth knowing. She thought about Patricia, who'd helped her step back into the light. And she thought about the choice she'd made 25 years ago, to give up everything she'd worked for, to become invisible, all for love. I wouldn't change it, Lisa, she whispered. Even knowing what I know now, even having lost what I lost, I'd still choose you. Every single time. Her daughter's hand squeezed hers, just barely, and Margaret smiled. Some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen. Margaret Chen had learned something different, that there was strength in invisibility, dignity in service, and that the most important person in any story isn't always the one in the spotlight, but when the spotlight finally finds you anyway. When someone sees you for who you really are, that's when the real story begins.